Welcome back from lunch. To deal with the classic conference post-lunch slump, we're now going to talk about sport and recreation with the greatest possible authorities on the subject. Now, while we're on the topic of hard to quantify benefits and return on investment, it's hard to think of one that is more appropriate for this discussion than sport and recreation. What is it worth to our economy to have people who are fit and healthy and who are enjoying the kinds of mental health benefits that we all know but don't necessarily, in my case, always actively pursue, can accrue from exercise? Not to mention the community benefits of getting together with a group of people that you like and doing something that doesn't feel like work. However, it is work to make those structures happen, and that's what we're talking about in this afternoon's session. So we're going to start off this session, and I remind you, as per usual, that you can feed through on the platform your thoughts as they come to mind. I'm going to introduce now our keynote speaker in this session, and then, as ever, we will bring some more people on stage for a discussion and some questions from you. And we're very fortunate to have this afternoon RJ Houston to lead this session. He's the General Manager, Capability and Industry at Royal Lifesaving Society, a group with a very, very unique and fascinating history in this country. RJ's worked in aquatics for 20 years across local government, non-profits, aquatic facility management organisations and peak bodies. At RLSSA, RJ, too many letters here, or battle on, oversees a number of portfolios including education, training, workforce development, industry safety, inland waterway projects and life-saving development. Would you please welcome RJ Houston?
We love an acronym in the sport and recreation sector and also in life-saving. But thanks very much for having me. I'd like to acknowledge as well the traditional owners of country here and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Great presentation by Dr. Angela Jackson, actually, and I'm really pleased that we are starting to talk about valuing the activities that this multi-sectoral kind of group provide to community and to society outside of just hard economics. I'm proud to say that we've done quite a bit of work in that space in the aquatic industry over the last few years, particularly as a result of COVID. And that was really inspired, actually, in some respects by the AFL, who started doing a lot of advocacy around social value, probably going back as far as 2014-ish. So it's been really useful to sort of work on that and provide some understanding of the social value. I'm going to touch on quite a broad range of topics in this presentation. It's sort of hard to talk about a bunch of sectors that I actually don't have a background in. So I think, also talking about the outdoor leadership sector as well. And it was great to connect with Andrew earlier on that. And I'm also talking about active recreation and fitness as well. And so I've got colleagues at AusActive as well as sort of the aquatic and leisure sector who've kindly helped contribute a little bit of thinking to this presentation in sort of consultation over the last couple of days. But I'm really the pool guy, so I'll do my best. But anyways, thank you. So I'll probably sort of start with, it's really about a current state, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities for the sector. I can see down here, great. And so I'll probably start here. So I borrowed heavily from the AusActive website around some of the key issues and advocacy items that they are looking at. But essentially, they've identified about 6,500 fitness businesses across Australia, about 35,000 employees, and contributing about $3 billion in net economic contribution. So that's not the social value, that's the hard GDP. So some of the key issues that they've identified in sort of their advocacy currently is skill shortages, that the sector also would benefit from raising its profile in terms of its professionalization. And I'll cover a little bit of data which helps support that argument, actually, later on in the presentation. There's also a need to support the role of peak bodies in this ecosystem. And so probably in terms of how things are structured, in Australia around sport and active recreation is there's a lot of attention to elite sport, and there's a lot of attention to national sporting organisations and that sort of Sport Australia kind of ecosystem with the Sports Commission. So the kind of idea of community sport, community recreation, leisure is somewhat, it seems to sort of sit out on its side. And I think so peak bodies have been doing a lot of work, particularly in the wake of COVID, to try and advocate what that community participation looks like and those sort of pathways and try and sort of shift the conversation, that sort of window of conversation away from the elite side of sports. So I think that's really interesting tension for us to navigate. They've also advocated for expanding vouchers for active kids, and that's something that we've advocated quite heavily in the water safety sector, as well as swimming and water safety for all, that no child should miss out, that every child should be able to learn how to swim and survive. So we have a strong alignment in that space as well. They've also identified that there's kind of a need for campaigning and public awareness of the role of fitness, active recreation, and to get more people more active more often, and then connecting that sort of preventative health agenda across government portfolios as well. And these are all sort of issues I suppose that my organisation would agree with as well. And then another thing that they advocate for is cutting red tape for the delivery of exercise classes in sort of public spaces and that kind of thing. So again, trying to make it easier for more people to get active and through a professional provider. So thank you to Fitness Australia and AusActive now for that advocacy. So moving across to aquatics, so there's about 333 million visits to public aquatic facilities in Australia. There's about 2,113 of them, and you can kind of see the distribution on that map. They're all across Australia. They're not just in the sort of metropolitan centres. They're in regional areas, and from the red centre of the country, you can see obviously there's more densification of it around the sort of population centres, but particularly in those regional communities. Australia is a pretty hot, dry place, right? So having a community pool is not just for active recreation and physical activity. It's also heat relief. It's a place to meet. It's a place to form social connections and to connect. And it forms for many towns, and particularly some of those remote Aboriginal communities and those sort of regional communities, the public pool is actually the heart of the town as well. So, and often co-located with other sort of sporting facilities and fitness facilities as well. 89% of Australians live within 20 minutes drive of their local pool. 58% of aquatic facilities are located in regional Australia. And in regional communities and remote areas, they play that crucial role in that community connection. We did some advocacy in 2021. We engaged an economics firm, I suppose, to assist us with that advocacy to try and quantify the social health and economic benefits or the social value of the sector. And we found that the sector provides $9.1 billion in social value every year to Australia. We also found that there was a $4.87 social return of investment for every dollar invested in the operations of a public aquatic facility. These are sort of based on big data and averages, but for the purposes of advocacy, and obviously it needs to be localized to individual communities. Some communities it's a much higher return, some communities it's a lower return. But for the purposes of understanding the national picture, this has been really powerful advocacy in terms of informing policymakers, community, and industry as to the contribution that it makes more broadly. So why is this guy from Royal Lifesaving talking about aquatic facilities? Well, we're really committed to the idea of drowning prevention and that drowning is a public health issue of concern. Every year, well, for starters, we've been working with aquatic facilities since the very start. So in the Industrial Revolution, as people had free time, with the 8 hours of work, 8 hours of recreation, they got into swimming. It's still a very, very popular activity. I think it's the #1 sport for women, #2 for men, and #1 for children. As people got into swimming, obviously the drowning rate started to go up, and life-saving organizations kind of sprung up to teach people swimming and water safety skills, but also resuscitation and rescue. So we've been working with people who have been managing aquatic facilities and swimming recreation for a very, very long time. And one of the things that the sector sort of builds its reputation on is this idea of safety, providing a safe place to swim where people can learn skills before they go into an open waterway, such as a beach or a river. However, there's still about six drownings every year in public pools in Australia. And we know actually there's thousands of rescues and near misses as well. And I'll show you a little bit of data in a second there around that. But what we've been trying to do is work with sector leadership to lift standards, to increase the professionalization of the sector, and to really emphasize and articulate the role that those facilities play in enhancing community well-being and safety. So this is the last year's sort of, I suppose, incident data sort of tree, I suppose, or pyramid. So there's about, again, the visitation number speaks for itself, but there's about 8,000 sort of rescues near misses. So professional pool lifeguards with qualifications, good management systems supporting them, saved about 8,000 people last year in public pools. So, however, there was still quite a few that got through the net, right? So we had about 18 non-fatal drownings involving some form of permanent impairment and 6 fatal drowning deaths in public pools. So there's still a long way to go, but the sector's worked really, really hard, and if you consider the sort of large number of visitation that goes through, they are still statistically the safest places to swim, and that's largely as a consequence of the sector's hard work and professionalization and driving standards. So kind of how we do that, I suppose, is we try and bring together industry groups that cover a sort of a multi-sectoral model, and we're really committed to that idea of convening sort of collaborative forums, bringing industry groups together, bringing together peak associations, government groups, to make sure that the guidance that we develop is industry relevant, is practicable, can be implemented, and sometimes facilitating agreement takes a long time, and there's a lot of hard work in that, but it's really important work to make sure that the industry is sort of coherent, can articulate its purpose. I'll just touch on a key challenge that we're having at the moment. So we've got a meeting, I think, tomorrow or Thursday of that group, and we're trying to get through, it's been 2 years, to kind of quantify the base qualifications that lifeguards, swim teachers, aqua exercise instructors, and a range of other roles like coaches and aquatic physiotherapists and those types. What is the base qualification that that person needs to get a job in the sector? And so quantifying that into a future-proofed kind of language in the form of industry guidelines has been a body of work. So that's one of the challenges for HumanAbility in this sector, is to simplify a little bit. And things like superseded but not equivalent, or superseded but equivalent, and all of those types of vet sector language, that's really hard for a regional pool manager who's an 18-year-old to interpret. And that's why peak bodies and then the work that we do in collaboration to try and make sure we understand that is really important. But also, I think structurally as well, it's really important to keep those types of things with as much industry relevance and continuity and simplicity as possible. So we've been doing that for about 30 years through these guidelines, which actually predates the vocational education training sector system. We've also been working to advocate the workforce profile as well, and I think I was happy to see that work that Sean, my colleague, has led, referenced in the recent HumanAbility report. So we know that there's 65,000 workers in the aquatic industry, which is a little bit less than was employed in 2019. 58% of the workforce is female. 4% identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, which is a little bit higher than the population rate. Most workers draw satisfaction from making a positive impact on people's lives and community. 61% of workers perform more than one role, so they are sort of multi-skilled. About a third of those workers want to stay in their role for 6 years or more, which we think is really encouraging, and we've got to sort of harness that energy, but they don't necessarily stay in their role for more than 6 years, so we've got to figure out the sort of gap between aspiration and what actually happens. About half of all pool lifeguards work seasonally, so there's some structural challenges there in terms of aligning with other sectors and seeing if there's any opportunities for this type of forum and other sort of collaborative multi-sectoral groups to see if we can help workers find sort of more year-round work between different types of related but different sort of sectors. We know that about 60% of pool lifeguards are students, 61% of them are Gen Z. 55% of swimming and water safety teachers are actually over the age of 45, and about a quarter of them are Gen Z, so under the age of 25. And some key challenges there, I suppose, in the workforce space is that despite a really high percentage of females working in the workforce as a whole, the amount of females that actually get up into center management roles, which is kind of the top of the tree, I suppose, at a place-based sort of business, is only 44%. So it's not quite representative of the industry as a whole. And we are seeing a pretty big competition for talent right now. I think everyone's experiencing that, but there is a pretty hard competition for talent. So the next sort of theme I want to touch on is kind of this idea of social value and the net value of sport and active recreation to society. And it's great that there's so many healthcare professionals here as well. So the sector's worked really hard to sort of position itself around the idea of being preventative hospitals and being connected to the healthcare system. And I think that it's a really good idea, and it's a really good sentiment, and I think there's some merit to it. But the Australian government actually, through the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, actually just released a study this year looking at the net benefit, the net social value, when you account for the benefits accrued from physical activity and in terms of mental health, social connection, all those types of things, and then you look actually at the rate of injuries and the amount of health costs associated with injuries from sport and physical activity. It's actually a very tight ratio. So the net benefit's about $300 million every year. So actually, we need to value things beyond just the idea of what the sort of health system in and out is, because it doesn't actually stack up that well, unfortunately. So you can kind of see that the number one health spending item is related to being overweight and obese in that graph. I hope you can see it and read it. But we do need to look at the injury space as well. So that's the sort of net benefit piece. You can see the sort of guilty culprits at the top of that tree, the sports. So wheeled motorsports, cycling's at the top. Wheeled motorsports. What have we got next after that? Soccer, football, Australian rules, footy, rugby. These are some of the sports at the top of the injury tree. And then thankfully for us and all the hard work that we've been doing with the aquatic sector, swimming's right down the bottom of the tree. But fitness and gyms is even further down the list. So in terms of not people's not the right word, but industries that are contributing, I suppose, in the sort of to the social value piece as well, also are less of a cost burden as well. And I think that's really relevant advocacy for this group. And you can kind of see as well in the top right corner, that's sort of the NSO funding model as well. So there's I couldn't find any sort of funding in a sense for gyms and active recreation fitness. So I think that's really interesting as well in terms of thinking about policy settings. In terms of industry challenges and opportunities broadly, and this is sort of applies to, I suppose, more than just our sector, but I want to talk really through the lens of our sector. So in a workforce sense, we had a lot of turnover over COVID. The swimming pools were first to close, last to reopen. And that happened again and again and again every time we went through the pendulum of public health orders. So when the industry eventually reopened for the final time, that second year and third year sort of senior lifeguard or senior gym instructor, those people are gone. They've all moved on to other sectors. They're not coming back. They've been burned. And so what that means is there was this rush to kind of get people through qualified and into facilities and into service delivery and get the doors open, rightfully so. But that all of the sort of soft, intangible mentoring and this is how this machine works. So that customer comes in all the time, and all of that stuff's gone. So everyone's really, really green. And I'm going to touch on a little bit around some of the Gen Z sort of mega trends, I suppose, in a sense as well. But there's been a real loss of that kind of corporate knowledge, I suppose, in the sector. Child safety is a massive issue, I think, in all sectors. But again, sort of another challenge with the sort of federated structure and interpreting national sort of generic guidance into industry-specific, sector-specific guidance, and making sure that there's consistency across the sort of state and territory legislation. Safety is really critical for the workforce, and I think that's really incumbent on this group to figure out as well. So this sort of the sector that HumanAbility is now looking after is also the highest for work health safety injury claims. So, and I didn't dive too much deeper into the data. I imagine there's a lot in sort of healthcare and lifting and that kind of thing. But you can see actually there's a rise in psychosocial claims and mental health injury claims. And that's costing a lot in premiums, but it's also something that we need to address. So I think that's also a really interesting sort of factor. So psychosocial risk, mental health, and worker safety, massive challenges for this sector and really need to be considered. The other one here is, so this is sort of the proportion of people in the population, I suppose, that have experienced a mental disorder. So it's about 44%. So it's a very, very high number, but almost 1 in 2, and I think we need to give that some really serious consideration moving forward. Other sort of opportunities, I suppose, is increasing diversity, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation. So community-facing services need to reflect the community. And there's a bit of emerging research into sort of the role of role models and bringing in sort of community groups and that if someone from a particular community is working in that service, they'll bring their family, they'll bring that sort of those sort of second and third connections into that service. So I think that's really important. Energy efficiency cost escalation, particularly in public swimming pools, is a very, very significant issue. Very, very significant issue. It's not just a significant increase in gas costs, for example. It's an extreme increase in gas costs, construction materials as well. We're not talking inflation. We're talking an order of 10, 20 times the rate of inflation. So that's a really significant challenge. I think we're seeing that play out in infrastructure generally. I think the government cut quite a number of infrastructure projects last week. But in terms of the facilities that are already out there delivering services, the cost of gas and sort of maintaining those facilities is a really, really big challenge right now. And then this is another one that I think is, for this group, really to give some really good consideration to, is the sort of, there's been, as a result of sort of workforce shortage advocacy and that kind of thing, there's been a lot of funding pumped into the system for training. And so that kind of ecosystem has shifted a little bit. We have a lot of people that did things like CPR at home or aquatic technical operations at home. So they've learned how to run a pool plant without ever stepping into a plant room. Online only training. And we've also seen that sort of funding. So what that does is it sort of encourages a commercial market in metro areas. And the old sort of, I suppose, the old sort of value proposition was that the sort of peak association training providers would do the metro areas, and then they would use that to subsidize training delivery in the regional areas. And because they were a peak body with a sort of values and mission remit, that was part of the deal, is that they would run a very commercially sound sort of operation in the cities, and that would subsidize getting out to make sure that people could get qualified in regional areas. That is shifting. So there is a sort of seismic shift in this sort of market-based solution. It's going to be really, really critical for service delivery continuity. I'm not sure the solution, but I think it's worth highlighting. And now, to sort of finish up, I'd just like to give you some rapid sort of workforce megatrends, which I think are applicable to all of you, and I hope that you find something to pull away from this. So in 2023, Gen Z, I suppose, is about a quarter of the workforce, or not yet a quarter of the workforce, sorry. In the top bar, it's the sort of blue bar. In the second bar, which is 2033, Gen Z will be about a quarter of the workforce. And then millennials make up nearly another quarter. So it's about half the workforce. I'm a millennial. I'm not sure if anyone else is a millennial, but I remember speaking at forums about 10 years ago, and it was like, what are we going to do about these millennials? They're a nightmare. And so now it's not just us, it's also Gen Z that we've got to work with, because that's the future of this industry. It's the future of all industry. And this is what's going on for them. So we've had serious real wage decline for that group. Declining labor income growth is the primary driver behind the decline in young people's income, according to our government. Increased participation in education has not resulted in higher sort of economic mobility for this generation. Intra-family transfer has become an increasing source of income for young people. Popular debate often features the sort of narrative that young people have too much avocado toast, which is very upsetting for those of us millennials that love avocado toast. So in Australia, despite zero economic impact, really, like zero major economic impact in Australia as a result of the GFC, despite that, real wages have been declining for young people in this country since the GFC. And again, I'm not sure the exact reasons of that. It would have been good to sort of drill into that earlier. So what does that mean for Gen Z? It means that the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is flipped on its head. So instead of competing on the status symbols that their previous generations competed on, a nice car, a better house, living in a better suburb, that's out of reach for this generation. So now it's really about perceptions and competing on perceptions, competing on values and purpose. And so you see, you can hire out a fake private jet for your Instagram photo shoot, and really it's about what people can sort of perceive as opposed to what really is. And I think that's really interesting. So in terms of what you're selling this workforce, in terms of attracting and retaining them, that bears some consideration as well, I think. So what are the sort of mega trends? So I've done a little bit of research outside of our sector as well in preparation for this. But so the reverse of quiet quitting, quiet hiring. So we're going to see A players. They know their value. They know that they're in high demand, and they know that they have options. So A players, how are you deploying A players? How are you rewarding A players? How are you growing A players, providing them with opportunities? Key challenge, and I know that I know there's lots of challenges, but they're looking for things like higher flexibility, additional time off, professional development, higher pay, bonuses, that type of thing. Contractors, there's an obvious incentive to get into contracting and gig working, as well as sort of entrepreneurial ventures. And so, say in the fitness industry, good fitness instructors will probably preference working for themselves rather than working for the business these days, because they can attract much higher rates. And also there's kind of a strong entrepreneurial bend in some of these sectors anyways. Improving frontline employee experience is critical. So flexibility and stability for all. They all want the same sort of flexibility that the office workers are getting. And I'm not sure how we're going to achieve that, but that's really what they're looking for, is certainty on the paycheck, but also the flexibility piece. Really hard in a brick and mortar frontline business. But purpose, belonging, progression, and perks are the things that we can kind of sell. And I think we need to be really strategic about selling purpose. And workers want to feel part of a movement. They want to make a difference, and they want to share a little bit in the rewards of that as well. So another opportunity, I suppose, is a sort of diversity in non-traditional pathways. So employers are increasingly hiring on skills and attributes, and then providing opportunities to go and get the qualification later. I think that's probably a good thing. But there are some tensions there around sort of risk management and competency. And we've seen that play out. I was just in South Australia and Queensland last week doing pool lifeguard challenges. And there's a little, we call it a QCPR mannequin, which measures the quality of compressions and ventilation. And I have to say, all of these fully qualified practicing lifeguards out there, I hope you don't need resuscitation in a public pool anytime soon, because yeah, the quality of that resuscitation, as the data was telling us, is quite a bit poorer than it might have been a few years ago. And whether that's because they haven't had the right equipment or they did the CPR at home on a pillow, I don't know. But in terms of the actual things that person needs to know, there's some serious challenges there. Another trend is going to be prioritizing health, well-being, and psychological safety. This is a non-negotiable for young people and just people generally. I don't think this is anything new. I think you just have to do it now to compete for talent. So proactive rest, psychological safety, and creating realistic demands on your workers. These are non-negotiables now. This is a challenge, this one, which is the erosion of social skills, especially Gen Z. So this is a generation that's done at least 2 years of schooling online. Many of them are doing university online at the moment. I just finished a master's degree completely online. I think I had 4 days face-to-face over the whole thing. Now, I've had the benefit of many, many years in workplaces and face-to-face education, but these young people are not getting those benefits. And so, there's a bit of virtual fatigue, I suppose, burnout, exhaustion, but most communication is digital as well. So these are, really key challenges in this sort of face-to-face brick-and-mortar services that all of you are working in and around and working on. And so providing those kind of softer skills is really, really critical. And they need those before they start work. They can't learn that on the job. You can't learn how to give someone safety instructions on the job when the incident's happening. They need to know how to do that before they get in the door. So I think that's going to be a really key challenge for this group as well. I did like the comment about robots aren't going to take our work. I think robots are going to help us do tasks. They're going to help us do things better. They're going to fill some of the gaps of human limitation, particularly around perception. This is an AI drowning detection software, very, very, very impressive, very new, very untested, but it seems like that's moving incredibly fast, and so that's going to help lifeguards identify the things that they might otherwise miss. It's not going to jump in the water. It's not going to pull someone out. It's not going to resuscitate them or resuscitate them well. So I think there's still a lot of room to grow and move there. But we're going to get data on a whole bunch of things that we've never had data on. How people move, how their eyes move, all sorts of things. And we're also going to see that us consumers are going to want to maybe not interact at all with people. They're just going to want to walk in the door and have the ticketing system interact with their app or whatever. I can't think of anything worse than lining up at the check-in counter at the airport anymore. It's all in the app. Great, fantastic, thank you. That's the same in all of these other services as well. I think there's definite some preferences for that anyways. But in any case, these are the sort of human skills of the future, and now really, which is communication, customer service, leadership, attention to detail, being able to collaborate, doers, people that get things done, underrated, cultural, social intelligence, empathy, and care. So these are the things that we need to invest in and make sure that people come out of foundational training with. And then finally, just something to think about is we can't get away from environmental, social, and governance considerations. About half of consumers rate this very highly at the moment, and about 90% of employees say they would trade some earnings for greater meaning at work. So coming back to purpose, I think that creating healthier, happier communities, saving lives is a great purpose to sell to young people. I wish you all the very best in selling that across your various portfolios. Thank you.